The house that takes people. Welcome back to Mystery Files, where we dig into the strangest cases America has ever seen. I'm your host, and tonight we're talking about a house in the mountains of West Virginia. A house where families go in but never come out. This is the story of 1428 Oakwood Lane in Blackwater Ridge, a place that has puzzled police, FBI agents, and scientists for over 40 years. The town and the house. Blackwater Ridge sits tucked away in the hills of West Virginia. Back in the 1970s, it was a busy coal mining town with about 3,000 people. Main Street had everything you needed: a hardware store, a small movie theater, a diner where folks met for morning coffee, and quiet neighborhoods where working families lived simple lives. Most people worked in the coal mines or ran businesses that helped the miners. But up on a hill, at the end of a winding road surrounded by old oak trees, stood a house unlike any other in town. People called it the Oakwood House because of the beautiful oak wood inside and the massive oak trees around it. The house was built in 1897 by a rich coal owner named Thaddeus Whitaker. He spent a fortune making it perfect. 3 stories tall with a wraparound porch, fancy decorations on the roof, and a small tower at the top where you could see for miles. The foundation was made of stone from local quarries. The floors were solid pine wood. The windows came all the way from Europe. Whitaker hired the best builders from Boston and Philadelphia to make every detail perfect. But Whitaker didn't enjoy his mansion for long. In 1899, just 2 years after he finished building it, workers found him dead at his desk in his study. No one could figure out why he died. The local doctor said his heart stopped, but people whispered that Whitaker had been perfectly healthy the day before. Some folks started saying the house itself killed him. Over the next several decades, the house changed owners many times, but no one stayed long. The Prescott family lived there for 5 years before suddenly moving to Cincinnati in 1906, saying the house cost too much to keep up. The Caldwells left in 1912 after their youngest son said he saw shadow people in the hallways. The Hendersons moved out in 1925 after strange electrical fires kept starting. The Watsons lasted the longest, from 1931 to 1947, but even they eventually talked about hearing weird noises, finding cold spots, and feeling like someone was always watching them. After the Watsons left, families moved in and out even faster. A banker named Leonard Grayson lived there briefly in the early 1950s before having a mental breakdown. The Miller family stayed less than a year in 1958 before moving out without explanation, leaving most of their stuff behind. 2 elderly sisters named Blackwood bought the house in 1962, but both died within months of each other in 1965. By the mid-1970s, the house had been empty for almost 10 years. It became a local curiosity and a dare for brave teenagers. Vandals broke windows, spray-painted the porch columns, and scattered beer bottles across the once beautiful lawn. The county thought about tearing it down, but somehow the paperwork never got finished. The first family, the Sullivans, 1979. In spring 1979, a family called the Sullivans bought the property for what seemed like a great price. The real estate listing called it a historic fixer-upper with unlimited potential. Words that locals knew meant problem property. James Sullivan was 42 years old and worked as a mining engineer. He had just taken a job at the Blackwater Coal Company. His old job was in Pittsburgh, but he was tired of city life and wanted to raise his family in a smaller, friendlier place. His wife Margaret was a high school English teacher who loved old books and stories. She fell in love with the Victorian house the moment she saw it in a real estate magazine. They had 2 kids, 17-year-old Danny, a popular athlete who was great at track and field, and 14-year-old Elaine, a quiet girl who loved reading just like her mother. Margaret had grown up in a similar small town in Ohio and wanted the same experience for her children. James had inherited some money when his father died the year before, and they saw the Oakwood house as the perfect chance to own a historic home they could never afford anywhere else. When they learned the price was just $42,000, much less than similar houses would cost in big cities, they jumped at the chance. On April 12, 1979, the Sullivan family station wagon pulled up to 1428 Oakwood Lane, packed with boxes and suitcases. It was a crisp spring morning with dogwood flowers blooming along the driveway and birds singing in the ancient oak trees. Neighbors watched as the excited family began unloading their belongings. Danny and his father carried a sofa up the front steps while Margaret directed where to put boxes labeled for different rooms. Elaine sat on the porch swing, writing in a diary and occasionally looking around at her new surroundings. Margaret told Gladys Perkins, who lived in the nearest house down the road, that she couldn't believe their luck in finding such a beautiful historic home for such a good price. "It needs some work," she admitted, "but James is handy and we're ready for a project. Can you imagine the dinner parties we can host in that dining room?" Gladys nodded politely but didn't mention the previous owners or the rumors that had been going around town for decades. She later told friends at church that she didn't have the heart to scare them on their first day. Besides, she thought maybe this family would be different. Maybe they would bring life back to the old Whitaker place and put its ghosts to rest. For the first 2 weeks, everything seemed perfectly normal. James drove to work each morning in his blue Ford, wearing one of his 3 suits and carrying the same brown leather briefcase his father had used. Margaret was preparing for job interviews at the local high school, hoping to get a teaching position for the fall. Danny quickly made friends with several boys from the neighborhood and could often be seen jogging along Oakwood Lane, training for track season. Elaine was more shy, spending most of her time arranging her huge book collection in her new bedroom or exploring all the hidden corners of the big house. The Sullivans went to the Methodist church on their second Sunday in town, where everyone welcomed them warmly. They shopped at Wilson's Grocery on Main Street, rented movies from the local video store, and seemed to be settling into small-town life easily. James even joined the Lions Club, going to his first meeting on April 23rd, where he impressed the other members with his ideas for improving the town. Gladys Perkins later told police that she had invited Margaret over for coffee on April 25th, and Margaret had seemed happy, though she did mention that the house had some strange things about it. "The electrical wiring must be broken," Margaret had said, stirring sugar into her coffee. "Lights flicker sometimes, and we keep hearing odd knocking sounds in the walls. James thinks it might be the pipes. Old houses make all sorts of noises," Gladys had said. "They settle over time, you know." Margaret had nodded, but then lowered her voice. "Elaine says she feels like someone's watching her when she's alone in her room. I told her it's just her imagination. She's always been dramatic, but sometimes when I'm in the kitchen by myself, I get that same feeling." Gladys had changed the subject to the upcoming spring festival, not wanting to worry Margaret more. She would later regret not sharing the stories she'd heard growing up about the house at the end of Oakwood Lane. On the evening of April 29, 1979, Gladys noticed all the lights were on at the Sullivan house much later than usual, past midnight. Through her bedroom window, she could see shadows moving behind the curtains, as if the family was still up and busy. She thought it was unusual but figured maybe they were having trouble sleeping in their new home. The next morning, she noticed James hadn't left for work. His blue Ford was still in the driveway, which was strange for a Tuesday. She thought maybe he was sick or taking a day off to work on the house. But when 3 days passed without any sign of activity, no cars coming or going, no lights turning on at dusk, no sign of Danny's daily run, Gladys became worried. She called the house several times, but no one answered. On May 2nd, she walked up the driveway and knocked on the front door, but got no response. The house sat silent with all the curtains closed. On May 3rd, Gladys called the Blackwater Ridge Police Department. The first discovery. Officer Ray Tanner, a young cop who had only been on the force for 2 years, was sent to check on the family. What Officer Tanner found, or rather didn't find, would become the first chapter in the Oakwood House mystery. When Officer Tanner arrived at 1428 Oakwood Lane on the morning of May 3, 1979, he found the front door unlocked. This struck him as odd right away. Even in a small town like Blackwater Ridge, people usually locked their doors. Drawing his gun just in case, he announced himself and entered the house. The first thing that hit him was the silence. No TV or radio playing, no footsteps, no voices, just the steady tick of a grandfather clock in the hallway. The air felt strangely still, as if the house had been sealed shut for weeks rather than days. Inside, he found a house that looked perfectly normal, except for one scary detail. The family was gone. In the kitchen, breakfast dishes sat in the sink, unwashed. A pot of coffee, now moldy, sat on the counter. A newspaper dated April 30th lay open on the kitchen table, folded to the sports section. There were 4 place settings at the table, all with half-eaten breakfast eggs turned rubbery on 3 plates. A bowl of cereal turned to mush on the 4th. The living room TV was still on, showing static, back when TVs would show snow and make that hissing sound when no signal was coming through. A woman's sweater lay over the arm of the sofa. A teen magazine was open on the coffee table with a pencil lying across it, as if someone had been marking things they liked. Upstairs, the scene became even more puzzling. All the beds were unmade, as if the Sullivans had just gotten up that morning. In the master bedroom, the closet doors stood open, showing all their clothes still hanging there. Margaret's jewelry box sat open on the dresser, her wedding ring and other valuable pieces still inside. James's wallet lay on the nightstand with $43 in cash and all his credit cards. In the master bathroom, a toothbrush lay on the edge of the sink with toothpaste still on it. The shower curtain was pushed to one side and the tiles were still damp, suggesting someone had bathed recently. Danny's room looked like any teenage boy's room in the late 70s. Posters of rock bands on the walls, track trophies on the shelves, dirty clothes spilling out of the hamper. His backpack hung on his desk chair, school books stacked neatly beside it. Elaine's room was neater, with bookshelves lining one wall and a collection of porcelain dolls on another. Her diary lay on the bed, open to an entry dated April 29th. Officer Tanner noted that the entry mentioned hearing scratching sounds in the walls again last night, but had no sign that the family was planning to leave. The basement and attic were also normal. The basement had James's workshop with half-finished furniture projects, while the attic stored holiday decorations and old trunks left by previous owners. The Sullivans' car was in the garage. Their wallets, purses, and keys were all there. The only thing missing besides the family was their dog, a golden retriever named Rusty. Officer Tanner called for backup, and within hours the small Blackwater Ridge Police Department had started a full investigation. They checked with relatives, friends, neighbors, anyone who might know where the family had gone. No one had seen or heard from the Sullivans since the evening of April 29th. A search of the surrounding woods found nothing. No footprints leading away from the house, no disturbed dirt that might show violence, no pieces of clothing caught on bushes. It was as if the family had simply disappeared from inside their home. The case quickly got bigger. State police were called in. Then FBI agents went through the house inch by inch, looking for hidden passages, false walls, anything that might explain how a family of 4 could vanish without taking any belongings. They found nothing unusual, just a well-built Victorian house with no apparent secrets. No signs of violence were found in the house. No blood, no signs of fighting, no evidence that someone had broken in. The only strange things were what was missing, for people who should have been there but weren't. The investigation went beyond the property. Bank records showed no unusual withdrawals. No one had bought airline tickets, bus or train tickets, or rented cars in their names. Their passports were found in a desk drawer in James's home office. It was as if they had never planned to leave at all. The disappearance shocked the small community of Blackwater Ridge. Search parties looked through the surrounding forest for weeks. Volunteers handed out flyers throughout the county and neighboring states. Local news covered the story heavily, and for a while, the mystery of the Sullivan family was national news. People had all kinds of theories. Some thought it might be amnesia. Maybe the family had been exposed to a gas leak that messed with their memories, causing them to wander away confused. Others thought it was a planned disappearance. Maybe James had secret debts or criminal problems and had put the family in a primitive witness protection program. The more creative residents whispered about alien abduction, pointing to reports of strange lights in the sky on the night of April 29th. Psychics and self-proclaimed paranormal experts came to town, offering to help find the missing family. One claimed to have visions of the Sullivans trapped in a cave system under the house, though digging revealed no such tunnels. Another insisted they had been taken by the house itself, a theory that surprisingly caught on with some of the older residents who remembered childhood stories about the Whitaker place. The case eventually went cold. The FBI agents went back to their offices. The news vans left for fresher stories. Life in Blackwater Ridge tried to get back to normal, though a dark cloud hung over the community. Parents watched their children more closely. Doors that had been left unlocked were now secured with deadbolts. And the house at the end of Oakwood Lane once again stood empty, its reputation now stained by mystery. In November 1979, a court declared the Sullivans legally missing, and the property went back to the bank that held the mortgage. A chain-link fence was put up around it, and no trespassing signs were posted. But these only made the place more attractive to thrill-seeking teenagers who regularly broke in on dares, though none reported anything scarier than creaking floorboards and the occasional cold draft. The second family, the Andersons, 1981. For 2 years, no one would go near the house at the end of Oakwood Lane. The property belonged to First National Bank of Blackwater Ridge, but even at a much lower price, there were no buyers. The locals had always been wary of the old Whitaker house. Now they were downright afraid. The bank tried everything. They hired landscapers to take care of the yard, repainted the outside, and even brought in a local pastor to bless the property. None of it made a difference. By 1981, the bank was desperate to get rid of what had become a big problem on their books. Then something unexpected happened. A family from out of state asked about the property. They had seen it listed in a national real estate magazine that specialized in historic homes. The bank's manager couldn't believe their luck when, in the summer of 1981, a new family arrived in Blackwater Ridge, unaware of the house's recent history. The Andersons, Carl, Diana, and their 10-year-old son Michael were from Cincinnati. Carl was a civil engineer who had switched to management, taking a job overseeing operations at the same mining company where James Sullivan had worked. Diana was a nurse who had gotten a job at Blackwater Regional Hospital, eager to escape the hectic pace of the Cincinnati Medical Center where she had worked before. Michael was a bright, curious boy who collected rocks and insects and was excited about having woods to explore behind their new home. When their realtor showed them the Victorian house on Oakwood Lane, they fell in love with its character and space. The price was amazingly affordable for a property of its size and historical importance. Just $35,000, well below what similar homes would cost elsewhere. Local realtor Thomas Hendricks later admitted to playing down the Sullivan disappearance when showing the house to the Andersons. "I mentioned that the previous owners had left town unexpectedly," he said in a 1982 interview with the Blackwater Ridge Gazette. "I didn't go into details. It wasn't technically lying." What Hendricks didn't tell the Andersons was that the house had been on the market for 2 years, that local workers refused to do repairs inside the property, or that the county had thought about condemning it because of its connection to the Sullivan case. The bank, eager to get back its losses, had given Hendricks a big bonus for finding buyers, giving him a clear reason to downplay the house's troubled past. The Andersons moved in on July 7, 1981. This time, the town was watching more carefully. Gladys Perkins, still living down the road, made sure to visit with a welcome basket the very next day. She found Diana Anderson happily unpacking boxes in the kitchen and Michael playing with a model airplane in the yard. Everything seemed fine. "They seemed like such a nice family," Gladys would later remember. "I almost said something about the Sullivans, but they were so happy with their new home. I didn't want to scare them off." Carl spent weekends stripping decades of paint from the original woodwork, bringing the oak banisters and crown molding back to their former beauty. Diana planted a vegetable garden in the backyard and joined the hospital's charity committee. Michael made friends with several neighborhood children, though some parents quietly told their kids not to go inside the house, instead inviting Michael to play at their homes. For 3 months, the Andersons seemed to be adjusting well to life in Blackwater Ridge. Michael started 4th grade at the local elementary school, where he quickly became known for being smart and loving science. Diana became a well-liked member of the hospital staff, often working extra shifts and bringing homemade cookies to share in the break room. Carl was described by his co-workers as dedicated and friendly, if somewhat quiet. "A typical engineer," as one colleague put it. Then on October 12, 1981, Michael Anderson didn't show up for school. His teacher, Mrs. Eleanor Wilson, noticed right away that Michael was absent, since he had perfect attendance up to that point. When the school called the hospital to reach Diana, They were told she hadn't come to work either, which was unusual. She had never missed a shift without calling ahead. The hospital administrator tried calling the Anderson home but got no answer. Carl's secretary said he had called in sick that morning, saying he had a terrible headache. This wasn't completely unusual. Carl did suffer from occasional headaches that could be really bad. But when the secretary tried to call back that afternoon to check on him, the phone rang with no answer. Remembering all too well what had happened to the Sullivans, the school principal called the police immediately. Officer Ray Tanner, now a sergeant, was once again sent to 1428 Oakwood Lane. As he drove up the winding driveway, he couldn't shake the feeling of déjà vu. 2 years had passed since he discovered the Sullivan family missing, and the memory still haunted him. He had asked for a transfer to traffic duty after that case went cold, unable to shake the feeling that he had somehow failed the missing family. "I never expected to be back here," he told his partner as they approached the front door, "especially not for the same reason." And once again, he found an empty house with no signs of struggle or departure, just the everyday items of a family that had vanished in the middle of their lives. The scene was disturbingly similar to what he had found 2 years earlier. In the kitchen, dishes were stacked beside the sink, waiting to be washed. A grocery list was stuck to the refrigerator with a magnet: milk, bread, cereal written in Diana's neat handwriting. A pot of beef stew sat on the stove, the meat and vegetables now dried and crusty. In the living room, Michael's homework was spread across the coffee table, math worksheets half completed. A social studies textbook open to a chapter on Native American tribes. A blanket was crumpled on the couch, as if someone had been sitting there recently. Upstairs, the master bedroom showed no signs of packing or getting ready for a trip. Diana's nursing uniforms hung in the closet. Carl's wallet sat on the dresser with $126 in cash and several credit cards. Their toothbrushes were still in the holder by the bathroom sink. In Michael's room, a collection of rocks was arranged on the windowsill. His favorite teddy bear, missing one eye and worn from years of love, lay on his pillow. A library book about dinosaurs was open on his nightstand, with a bookmark showing he had reached chapter 7. The family station wagon was parked in the garage. Like the Sullivans' car before it, it had nothing unusual in it, just maps in the glove compartment, a child's sweater on the back seat, an umbrella on the floor. This time, the police response was quick and thorough. The FBI was called in. The house and grounds were searched carefully. Agents interviewed everyone in town who had contact with the Andersons. The investigation found only one potential clue. Michael's teacher said that a week before the disappearance, the boy had become withdrawn in class. When asked what was wrong, Michael had said, "There's somebody in our house at night. I can hear them walking around in the walls." The teacher had thought it was just a child's imagination. Now she wondered if it might have been something more. He wasn't the type to make things up for attention, Mrs. Wilson told investigators. He was a very factual child, very scientific in his thinking. If Michael said he heard something, I believe he did hear something. FBI agents looked into the possibility that the house might have hidden passages or secret chambers built into some historic homes. They brought in structural engineers and even used early thermal imaging technology to scan the walls. Nothing unusual was found. Diana's colleagues at the hospital noted that in the days before her disappearance, she had seemed unusually tired. One nurse remembered Diana mentioning that she wasn't sleeping well because of noises in the house. When asked what kind of noises, Diana had said, "Like someone pacing back and forth all night long. Carl thinks it's just the house settling, but it doesn't sound like that to me." The company where Carl worked had little to add. His behavior had been normal, his work unchanged. The only potentially important detail came from his boss, who remembered Carl mentioning that he needed to replace some drywall in one of the bedrooms because it felt soft in spots, like it might be water damaged. Despite the more thorough investigation, the Andersons' disappearance remained as mysterious as the Sullivans' 2 years earlier. No traces of the family were found in any of the surrounding towns. Their bank accounts weren't touched. No evidence of violence was discovered. Blackwater Ridge was now the site of 2 identical mysteries, 2 families who had vanished without a trace from the same house. national attention and investigation. Two families had now vanished from the same house within 2 years. The story made national headlines. Blackwater Ridge became famous for the mystery, drawing curious tourists and paranormal investigators. News vans lined Oakwood Lane for weeks, with reporters doing live broadcasts with the scary Victorian house in the background. A segment on the popular TV show Unsolved Mysteries featured dramatic recreations of both disappearances, making the house's reputation even worse. The house was sealed off as an ongoing crime scene, and the bank that owned it couldn't have given it away if they tried. Yellow police tape surrounded it, and a patrol car was stationed at the end of the driveway around the clock to keep out trespassers. Despite these precautions, there were multiple reports of break-ins, mostly by thrill-seekers hoping to encounter whatever had taken the two families. A group of paranormal researchers from a Virginia university set up equipment in the house for a weekend with police permission. Their instruments recorded big temperature changes and what they described as unusual electromagnetic readings, but nothing conclusive. An infrared camera caught what looked like a heat signature moving through the upstairs hallway when no one was there, but skeptics said it could easily have been a reflection or equipment problem. The FBI investigation continued for months, becoming one of the Bureau's most puzzling unsolved cases. Agents followed every possible lead, interviewing distant relatives of both families, checking international border crossings, even investigating local coal mines for unmapped tunnels that might connect to the house. Nothing worked out. The town of Blackwater Ridge suffered afterward. Tourism initially went up as curiosity seekers came to the area, but the local economy was hurt when several families moved away, unwilling to live near what some now called the disappearing house. Property values throughout the neighborhood dropped. The elementary school where Michael Anderson had been a student saw enrollment fall as parents moved their children elsewhere. Years passed. The investigation stalled. Eventually, 1428 Oakwood Lane was released from police custody and once again put up for sale, though no one expected it would ever sell. The bank that owned it wrote off the property as a loss. The fence and warning signs stayed, but the patrol car was sent to more pressing duties. Weeds took over the once beautiful lawn. Paint began to peel from the outside. Windows were broken by storms and vandals. The third family, the Chens, 1986. But time has a way of dulling even the sharpest fears. By 1986, the disappearances had become urban legend rather than recent memory. A new generation of teenagers dared each other to spend nights on the property, though few made it past the fence. The national media had moved on to fresher mysteries. Even longtime residents like Gladys Perkins spoke less often about the Sullivans and Andersons. When Dr. Raymond Chen, a geology professor at West Virginia University, asked about buying the property, the bank was all too happy to get rid of it at a fraction of its value. The bank manager did insist on full disclosure this time, giving Dr. Chen newspaper clippings about the disappearances and making him sign a waiver acknowledging the house's history. But rather than scaring off the professor, the mystery seemed to interest him. Dr. Chen was a practical man of science who laughed at the superstitious whispers surrounding the house. Born and educated in Taiwan before coming to the United States for his doctorate, he had built his career on the careful application of the scientific method. He was moving to Blackwater Ridge to study unusual rock formations in the nearby mountains and needed a spacious home for both his family and his huge collection of rock specimens and research materials. If there is something unusual about this house, I will discover it through careful investigation, not ghost stories, he reportedly told the bank manager. Besides, at this price, I could tear it down and rebuild if necessary. The Chens Raymond, his wife Linda, and their twin 8-year-old daughters May and Lynn moved into the Oakwood house in August 1986. Dr. Chen made a point of inviting the local newspaper to cover their move-in day, stating firmly for the record that he didn't believe in ghost stories or small-town hysteria. This is a magnificent example of late Victorian architecture, he told the reporter, pointing to the fancy woodwork and high ceilings. It's a shame it has been neglected because of unfounded fears. We intend to restore it to its former glory. He even let the reporter tour the house, pointing out the renovations he planned to make and the space in the basement he would convert into a home laboratory. When asked directly about the disappearances, Dr. Chun suggested there must be a logical explanation. Perhaps carbon monoxide leaks that caused the families to become confused and wander off, or structural problems that had since been fixed. Linda Chun, a soft-spoken librarian who had taken a job at the county library, spoke of hosting faculty dinner parties and bringing back the house's former glory. "This will be a happy home again," she told the newspaper. "Our daughters love having so much space to play, and Raymond and I appreciate the historical importance of the property." The twins, dressed in matching blue dresses for the newspaper photographer, seemed equally thrilled with their new home. "We have the biggest bedroom ever," Lynn told the reporter, "and Daddy says we can paint it any color we want." The article published in the Blackwater Ridge Gazette under the headline "New Family Brings Fresh Start to Historic Home" included a photograph of the Chens standing proudly on the front porch. Dr. Chun looked confident, one arm around his wife, the other holding a pipe. Linda looked slightly more reserved but smiling. The twins stood in front, beaming at the camera. Gladys Perkins kept the article, adding it to her scrapbook alongside clippings about the previous disappearances. "I hope they'll be all right," she wrote in the margin. "They seem like such nice people." For 6 months, the Chens were visible and active in the community. Dr. Chun commuted to the university 3 days a week and spent the rest of his time doing field research or working in his basement lab. Linda volunteered at the library, helping to organize a Chinese New Year celebration that January that was well attended by the community. The twins were enrolled in the local elementary school and joined the Girl Scouts, quickly becoming popular for their intelligence and identical appearance, which even their teachers had trouble telling apart. The house itself was transformed. Dr. Chun hired workers from the next county over. Local contractors still refused the job, to repair the roof and replace broken windows. The outside was repainted and the grounds were cleared of weeds and debris. Motion-activated security lights were installed around the edges to discourage vandals. Dr. Chin explained, though some wondered if he had other concerns about unwanted visitors. In early February 1987, several residents reported hearing unusual sounds coming from the Chun property late at night, mechanical noises like drilling or heavy equipment. When asked about it at a faculty cocktail party, Dr. Chun explained that he was installing new equipment in his basement laboratory for analyzing rock samples. "The work can be quite noisy," he admitted. "I apologize if it disturbed anyone." Around the same time, Linda Chun began canceling her shifts at the library, citing family responsibilities. The twins continued going to school but stopped participating in Girl Scouts. Neighbors noticed that the family seemed to be spending more time at home, with fewer trips into town. Then, on February 23, 1987, the newspaper office received a strange call from Dr. Chun. The editor, Bill Matthews, described the professor as sounding upset, almost frantic. Dr. Chun asked that a reporter come to the house immediately. He claimed to have made a significant discovery that would explain everything about this place. Matthews, interested but cautious given the house's history, sent a junior reporter named Sarah Collins to the Chun residence. Sarah had only been working at the Gazette for 6 months and wasn't familiar with the full history of the Oakwood house. Matthews briefed her quickly, telling her to call the office immediately if anything seemed wrong. When she arrived, no one answered the door. Sarah looked through windows and walked around the property but found no sign of the family. Their 2 cars, Dr. Chen's Volvo station wagon and Linda's Honda Civic, were parked in the driveway. Sarah called the police from her car. By now, the Blackwater Ridge Police Department had a standard procedure for 1428 Oakwood Lane. They entered with weapons drawn, expecting the worst. Once again, they found an empty house with no signs of struggle. In the kitchen, lunch was half-prepared, bread sliced, lettuce washed, mayonnaise open on the counter. A children's cartoon played on the small TV that sat on the kitchen counter. In the living room, a larger TV played an afternoon talk show. Upstairs, one of the twins' beds was unmade while the other was neatly arranged with stuffed animals propped against the pillows. In Dr. Chen's basement laboratory, papers were scattered across his desk, and a rock sample sat under a microscope. Sophisticated equipment hummed quietly, recording data on a continuous roll of paper that spilled onto the floor in an unread pile. Against one wall stood what looked like a homemade seismograph, its needle jumping slightly in response to tiny vibrations. But this time there was something new. On Dr. Chen's desk, officers found a legal pad with frantically scribbled notes. Most were scientific observations about mineral compositions and underground structures. But the last entry, underlined multiple times, read, "They're in the walls." Next to the pad lay a stack of blueprints, the original architectural plans for the house, which Dr. Chen had apparently gotten from the county records office. Several areas were circled in red marker, all of them sections of wall on the second floor. A tape recorder sat beside the blueprints. When officers pressed play, they heard Dr. Chen's voice speaking rapidly. February 23, 1987. I've confirmed my suspicions about the unusual properties of the limestone used in the foundation. The samples contain a previously undocumented mineral composition that appears to react to specific electromagnetic frequencies. When stimulated by these frequencies, the molecular structure temporarily destabilizes, creating what can only be described as a localized phase shift in the surrounding materials. This explains the reports of soft or permeable walls. I need to warn. The recording cut off suddenly there. No further explanation. No sign of what had happened to the Chen family. Escalating mystery and failed solutions. The disappearance of the Chen family brought back national interest in the Oakwood house. Cable news networks sent crews to Blackwater Ridge. Talk shows debated theories ranging from scientific to supernatural. A best-selling true crime writer announced plans for a book about the 3 vanished families. Paranormal researchers came to Blackwater Ridge in crowds, setting up equipment on the street since they were banned from entering the property. A team from a popular ghost hunting TV show offered the county a large sum for permission to film inside, but officials said no, citing the ongoing investigation. The house was featured on TV specials about unsolved mysteries. Psychics offered their services to grieving relatives. A small memorial of flowers and stuffed animals appeared at the end of the driveway, though no one was quite sure who had started it. The common theory among locals was that the house was haunted or cursed. Old-timers remembered that Thaddeus Whitaker, the original owner, had supposedly built the house on land considered sacred by the Native American people who had once lived in the area. Others whispered that Whitaker himself had practiced dark rituals in the basement, trying to extend his life through supernatural means. Law enforcement had a different idea. With 3 families now missing, they suspected a human element, perhaps a serial kidnapper with a complex plan. Investigators looked for connections between the families. All 3 fathers had worked for the same mining company. All 3 families had school-age children. All 3 had bought the house through the same bank. But these similarities seemed more like coincidence than something sinister, given the small size of Blackwater Ridge. The FBI created a task force dedicated only to the Oakwood house disappearances. They brought in profilers, forensic specialists, and even talked with geologists about Dr. Chen's notes on the unusual limestone. Nothing clear came from these efforts. The house stayed empty for nearly a decade after the Chens vanished. The bank, having been burned 3 times, refused to list the property again. Instead, they approached the county about condemning it or turning it into public land. These talks dragged on for years, complicated by the house's historical status and the ongoing mystery surrounding it. Eventually, in 1996, the bank gave the property to the county with the rule that it never be sold to private owners again. The county commissioners voted to tear down the structure and turn the land into a small park, hoping to finally put the mystery to rest. But before demolition could begin, a preservation society filed a court order, arguing that the Whitaker house was of significant historical value and should be protected. The legal battle that followed attracted the attention of a development company based in Charleston. Seeing potential in the property's notorious reputation, Appalachian Heritage Developments approached the county with an unusual proposal. They would buy the land, restore the house, and turn it into a mystery tourism destination, part museum, part haunted attraction. The company's pitch included plans for guided tours, a gift shop, and special overnight stays for the particularly brave. The county, eager to get rid of the property and its associated problems, agreed to the sale in 1997. The development company began renovations immediately, focusing first on structural repairs to the roof and foundation. But before the project could be completed, Appalachian Heritage Developments went bankrupt in the economic downturn that affected much of the region in the late 1990s. Construction equipment was abandoned mid-job. Partially restored rooms were left unfinished. The house somehow survived, falling into the hands of yet another bank, sitting unsold for several more years. The fourth family, the Delaney's, 2001. In 2001, to the amazement of Blackwater Ridge residents, the house was bought by a couple from Virginia. Jacob and Ruth Delaney were both history professors who specialized in Appalachian folk architecture. They claimed to be unaware of the house's notorious past when they first viewed it, seeing only a magnificent example of Victorian craftsmanship in need of restoration. When the realtor reluctantly told them about the 3 missing families, the Delaneys were not scared off. Ruth later told neighbors they considered the disappearances fascinating but explainable, and believed there must be a logical reason behind them. Jacob theorized that the house might have hidden passages or exits that previous investigators had missed. "We're academics," Ruth explained to Gladys Perkins, who was now in her 70s but still living in the same house down the road. "We don't put much stock in superstition. Besides, the price was too good to pass up." The Delaneys had no children, just a large Bernese mountain dog named Hector. They spent the spring of 2001 carefully restoring the house's exterior, repainting the siding its original white and the shutters dark green. They replaced broken windows, repaired the porch, and even restored the widow's walk on top of the roof. Inside, they focused on preserving original features while updating the electrical and plumbing systems. Jacob, who had worked as a carpenter during his college years, took on much of the woodwork restoration himself. Ruth documented the process extensively, planning to use it as a case study for a book on historic home preservation. Locals watched with a mixture of admiration and dread. Gladys Perkins, now in her 70s and still living down the road, told anyone who would listen that those professor types are too smart for their own good, and predicted another tragedy. For once, it seemed the town pessimist might be wrong. The Delaneys lived in the Oakwood house for 11 months without incident. They hosted an open house that Christmas, inviting the community to see the restored first floor. They joined the local historical society and began documenting the house's original features for the county archives. Jacob became particularly interested in Dr. Chen's research, getting copies of his notes from the police files through a Freedom of Information Act request. He set up his own small laboratory in the basement, though he focused more on analyzing the composition of the original paints and varnishes than on the limestone foundation. Ruth, meanwhile, became friendly with Bill Matthews at the Gazette, often stopping by the newspaper office to research articles about the house from the late 19th century. She put together a comprehensive timeline of the property's ownership and notable events, which she planned to include in her book. The Delaneys were careful but not fearful about living in the infamous house. They installed a sophisticated security system and always kept their cell phones charged. When asked if they ever experienced anything unusual, Ruth would smile and say, "Just the typical old house noises. Creaking floors, settling foundations, nothing that can't be explained by physics and architecture." Then, on the night of March 15, 2002, a severe thunderstorm hit Blackwater Ridge. The worst the area had seen in decades. It knocked down power lines and flooded low-lying areas. Wind, gusts of up to 70 miles per hour tore shingles from roofs and knocked down trees. Power was cut across the county, leaving residents in darkness as the storm raged through the night. When service was restored the next morning, the Delaneys didn't call to report outages like their neighbors did. The power company sent a crew to check the lines leading to their house, but everything appeared to be working normally. The meter showed electricity flowing into the property. No one thought much of it until Ruth failed to appear for a historical society meeting 3 days later. The society president, remembering the house's history, called the police immediately. Sergeant Ray Tanner, now nearing retirement, made his 4th welfare check at 1428 Oakwood Lane. By now, he told colleagues he had memorized every creaking floorboard in the place. The house had become a recurring nightmare in his career, a case he could never solve and would never forget. "I knew what we'd find before we even went in," he later told Matthews during an interview for the Gazette. Empty house, no sign of a struggle. Everyday items left behind as if they'd just stepped out. Same story, different decade. And once again, he found an empty house with no explanation. Jacob's reading glasses sat on an open book in the study. Ruth's knitting project, a half-finished sweater, remained on her favorite chair in the living room. Their toothbrushes, still damp, stood in a cup by the bathroom sink. The bed was unmade on one side, as if Ruth had gotten up but Jacob had not. In the kitchen, a battery-powered radio played softly, presumably used during the power outage and never turned off. A loaf of homemade bread, now rock-hard, sat on the cutting board. 2 coffee mugs contained the dried remains of their last morning brew. This time, the only unusual element was the Delaney's dog, Hector, found hiding in a closet, severely dehydrated and shaking with fear. The veterinarian who treated him noted that the dog seemed to be in a state of shock, as if he had witnessed something deeply traumatic. That dog wasn't just scared of thunder, Dr. Karen Phillips told investigators. "I've treated animals after all kinds of traumas, abuse, accidents, fires. This was different." Hector was terrified of something specific. For weeks afterward, the dog would bark frantically at empty corners and refuse to enter certain rooms. He would grow upset when anyone approached the walls of the examining room at the vet's office. Dr. Phillips tried various anti-anxiety medications, but nothing seemed to help. Hector was eventually adopted by a family in Charleston, though caretakers reported he never fully recovered from whatever had frightened him. Until his death years later, he would bark frantically at empty corners and refuse to sleep in any room alone. The family that adopted him reported that he would whimper whenever their house settled at night. The county takes control. By 2002, the pattern was undeniable. 4 families had vanished from the same house over the course of 23 years. The county took possession of the property through eminent domain, declaring it a public safety hazard. This time, there would be no discussion of selling it or preserving it for historical value. The county commissioners voted unanimously to demolish the structure, but legal complications arose almost immediately. The Historical Society filed another court order. Distant relatives of the missing families raised objections. Environmental assessments had to be done. The process dragged on for years. Meanwhile, the property became impossible to insure and no bank would finance its purchase. The fence around the edges was reinforced and no trespassing signs were posted every 10 feet. Security cameras were installed, monitored by the police department. Armed guards patrolled the grounds at night, not to protect the property from intruders, but to protect potential intruders from the property. Despite these precautions, break-ins continued. A pair of college students on spring break were caught inside in 2005, filming for what they called a documentary about the house. 2 years later, a self-proclaimed psychic medium and her assistant spent a night in the house before being discovered by the morning patrol. Both claimed to have made contact with entities within the walls, but couldn't provide any information about the missing families. The Oakwood house sat abandoned, falling into disrepair. Teenagers broke in on dares. Paranormal investigators conducted overnight stays that yielded inconclusive evidence. A fire of suspicious origin damaged part of the roof in 2008, but even that failed to destroy the seemingly indestructible house. The county repaired the damage, not wanting to risk the collapse of an unstable structure in a residential neighborhood. The mysterious author Malcolm Hayes, 2012 to 2019. Then, in 2012, a new chapter in the Oakwood house saga began. A reclusive author named Malcolm Hayes purchased the property in cash through a private sale, bypassing the various legal entanglements through a series of complicated moves involving shell companies and offshore accounts. By the time the county realized what had happened, Hayes had already taken residence. The county commissioners considered challenging the sale but were advised by their lawyers that the legal battle would be costly and potentially unsuccessful. Instead, they required Hayes to sign an extensive waiver, acknowledging the risks and absolving the county of any responsibility. He did so without hesitation. Hayes was known for writing psychological thrillers under the pen name M. Hayes with titles like The Thinning Veil and Doorways to Elsewhere that dealt with themes of parallel dimensions and alternate realities. Rumors circulated that he bought the infamous house for research purposes, planning to base his next novel on its mysterious history. Unlike previous owners, Hayes kept entirely to himself. He installed a state-of-the-art security system with cameras and motion sensors around the edges. The windows were covered with heavy curtains or, in some cases, boards. The Victorian facade was restored, but no one was invited inside to see the interior renovations. Delivery drivers reported that he never came to the door, instead leaving instructions to leave packages on the porch. His groceries were delivered from a store in the next town over. Mail addressed to him piled up in the local post office unclaimed. The only glimpse neighbors ever caught of him was an occasional silhouette passing by a window at night, visible only as a shadow against the glow of what appeared to be numerous computer screens. Hayes turned down all attempts at contact from locals. He declined an invitation to join the Historical Society. He ignored requests for interviews from the Gazette. When carolers from the Methodist Church stopped by during Christmas of 2012, the security system played a pre-recorded message thanking them for their visit but requesting privacy. Occasionally, unusual equipment would be delivered to the house: satellite dishes, antennas, what appeared to be scientific instruments of unknown purpose. Twice, a van bearing the logo of a university physics department arrived, unloaded large crates, and departed without its occupants ever being seen. For almost 7 years, Hayes lived as a phantom in the house that had consumed 4 families. Some locals speculated that he had discovered the secret to surviving the house by avoiding human contact. Others suspected he might be responsible for the previous disappearances and had returned to the scene of his crimes. The more charitable suggested he was conducting serious research into the phenomena that had claimed the others. Gladys Perkins, now in her 90s and residing in a nursing home in town, told visitors that she sometimes dreamed of the house. "In my dreams, it's full of people," she would say. "All the missing ones living their lives like nothing ever happened. But they can't see me and I can't reach them." On the morning of January 3, 2019, a moving truck appeared at 1428 Oakwood Lane. Workers loaded furniture and boxes for several hours. Neighbors watched from behind curtains and car windows, unwilling to approach but unable to resist observing this unusual development. By afternoon, the truck departed and the house stood empty once again. Malcolm Hayes had apparently moved out without saying goodbye to the town he had never really greeted in the first place. 2 weeks later, a for sale sign appeared on the front lawn. The listing, managed by a real estate company in Charleston, described the property as a historic Victorian with a colorful past, perfect for the discerning buyer looking for a unique opportunity. The asking price was surprisingly reasonable for a house of its size and architectural significance. Local reaction was predictable: disbelief that anyone would willingly purchase the notorious property, speculation about what Hayes had been doing there for 7 years, and morbid curiosity about who might be the next victims of whatever curse or phenomenon plagued the house. But this time something was different. The listing included professional photographs of the interior, showing rooms that had been completely renovated and modernized. The original woodwork had been restored to a warm golden glow. The kitchen featured high-end appliances and marble countertops. The basement, Dr. Chen's former laboratory, had been converted into a home theater and wine cellar. There was no hint of the scientific equipment Hayes had allegedly installed. No visible evidence of whatever research he might have conducted. Perhaps most strikingly, the walls in every room had been painted a stark, brilliant white, making the spaces look bright and innocent, a sharp contrast to the dark history that clung to them. The Return, Elaine Sullivan, 2019, which brings us to the most amazing twist in the story of the Oakwood house. In March 2019, exactly 40 years after the Sullivan family first disappeared, a woman in her mid-50s arrived in Blackwater Ridge and checked into the town's only motel, a modest place called the Pine View Inn on the outskirts of town. She gave her name as Elaine Foster. The motel owner, Tom Wilson, later remembered that there was something vaguely familiar about her, though he couldn't place where he might have seen her before. "She had this look about her," he told the Gazette. "Kind of haunted, like someone who's seen things they can't unsee. Paid in cash. kept to herself, didn't want housekeeping coming in her room. On her second day in town, the woman walked down Main Street, pausing to look in shop windows and occasionally checking a small notebook she carried. Several residents reported seeing her standing outside the elementary school during lunch recess, watching the children play. Others noticed her sitting on a bench in the town square for hours, seemingly lost in thought. The next day, she walked into the office of the Blackwater Ridge Gazette and asked to speak with the editor. Bill Matthews, who had been with the paper since the Chun disappearance in 1987, agreed to meet with her. Matthews was nearing retirement and had spent most of his career chronicling the various chapters of the Oakwood House mystery. The 4 disappearances and their aftermath had been the defining story of his journalistic career. What Elaine Foster told him that afternoon would shake the foundations of everything the town thought it knew about the Oakwood house. "My name is not really Elaine Foster," she began, sitting stiffly in the chair across from his desk. "It's Elaine Sullivan. 40 years ago, my family moved into the house at 1428 Oakwood Lane. And then we disappeared." Matthews was skeptical at first. Over the years, he had encountered numerous hoaxers and attention-seekers claiming connections to the missing families. Just the previous year, a man had come forward claiming to be Danny Sullivan, but fingerprint comparisons with school records had quickly exposed him as a fraud. But as the woman produced a high school ID card from 1979 and old family photographs, his doubt began to waver. The ID showed a teenager with feathered hair and a shy smile, wearing the fashion of the late 70s wide collar, tinted glasses, a macrame choker. It was unmistakably a younger version of the woman sitting before him. When she accurately described details of the house's interior that had never been published in the paper, the specific pattern of the kitchen tile, the way the third step on the back stairs creaked, the small stained glass window in the attic that cast colored light on the floor at certain times of day, he became convinced she might be telling the truth. Elaine Sullivan claimed she had returned to Blackwater Ridge to confront her past and to warn others about the house. She agreed to a formal interview, which Matthews recorded. The resulting article would become the most read piece in the Gazette's history, picked up by wire services and republished in newspapers across the country. What follows is a transcript of that interview, which provides the only first-hand account of what happens to those who vanish from the Oakwood house. Matthews. This is Bill Matthews, editor of the Blackwater Ridge Gazette, interviewing Elaine Sullivan on March 28, 2019. Ms. Sullivan claims to be a member of the Sullivan family who disappeared from 1428 Oakwood Lane in 1979. Elaine, thank you for speaking with me today. Elaine, thank you for believing me enough to listen. Matthews, I'm keeping an open mind until I hear your story. Can you start by telling me what happened on the morning your family disappeared? Elaine, it was April 30th, 1979, a Monday. I remember because I was dreading going back to school after the weekend. We were all having breakfast. Mom was making coffee. Dad was reading the newspaper. Danny was wolfing down cereal before heading out to meet friends. Normal morning stuff. Mom had made scrambled eggs for herself and Dad. I was picking at a piece of toast. The radio was playing softly in the background. I think it was Fleetwood Mac. Matthews. And then, Elaine. Then Dad noticed something strange about the kitchen wall, the one next to the pantry. There was a shimmer, like heat rising from pavement in summer. He got up to look at it, and when he touched the wall, his hand went through it. Not like breaking through drywall, it passed through as if the wall wasn't solid. Matthews. Are you saying the wall was what, a hologram? Elaine, no, nothing like that. It was more like the wall became permeable, like it was still there, but we could pass through it. Dad called us over. Mom was freaking out, but Danny and I thought it was the coolest thing ever. Dad was a mining engineer, so he started theorizing about some kind of magnetic anomaly or gas pocket causing hallucinations. He kept touching the wall, pushing his hand in deeper each time. Matthews. What happened next? Elaine. Danny, being 17 and an idiot, stuck his whole arm through. Then he stepped all the way through, like walking through a doorway. He turned back to us with this big grin and said, "Come on. It's amazing in here." Mom went next, calling for Danny to come back. Dad followed her. I was last. I hesitated, but I could hear them talking to each other on the other side, saying it was incredible that I had to see it. So I stepped through. Matthews, through the solid wall? Elaine, yes. And that's when everything changed. Matthews, please continue, Miss Sullivan. Elaine, on the other side of that wall was another version of our house. It looked almost identical except everything was slightly off. The colors were wrong, more vibrant somehow. The furniture was in the same places but different styles. And the windows didn't show Blackwater Ridge outside. They showed a landscape I didn't recognize. Rolling hills, but with vegetation I'd never seen before. The sky was wrong, a color that wasn't quite blue. Matthews, are you suggesting you entered another dimension? Elaine, I don't know what to call it. A parallel world? Another reality? All I know is that we couldn't get back. The wall solidified behind us. We were trapped. Matthews, how did you survive? You said you were there for years. Elaine, the house provided for us in a way. The kitchen would have food in it each morning. Not our food, strange fruits, meat that didn't look like anything from Earth, but it was edible. Water came from the taps, though it tasted metallic. We never went hungry or thirsty. Matthews, were you alone in this other place? Elaine, not for long. In what felt like maybe a year, time moved differently there. Another family appeared. They came through the dining room wall. It was the Andersons. They were as confused and terrified as we had been. Matthews, the second family to disappear from the house. Elaine, yes. Mr. Anderson recognized my dad from the mining company. That's when we realized we were still somehow connected to the real house on Oakwood Lane. Every few years, a new family would appear. The Chens with their twin girls, then the Delaney's with their dog. The dog never adjusted, poor thing was terrified constantly. Matthews, what about Malcolm Hayes, the author? Elaine, Hayes was different. He didn't come through accidentally like the rest of us. He knew about the house, about the other side. He had researched it somehow. When he appeared in 2012, he brought equipment, devices he'd built to study the walls, the boundaries between our world and yours. He'd been investigating similar phenomena in other locations for years. He told us there are places all over the world where the boundaries between realities are thin. Most are in wilderness areas or abandoned places, so people rarely encounter them. But the Oakwood house sits at a particularly strong intersection. Matthews, and did he discover anything? Elaine, he developed a theory that the house sits on some kind of intersection, a place where our reality touches others. He found a way to control the permeability of the walls, to create temporary passages, but it took him years to perfect it. And the process was dangerous. The first few attempts. Well, let's just say not everyone survived. Matthews, if Hayes found a way out, why didn't everyone leave? Elaine, not everyone wanted to. My parents, after a while, they adapted. The other side wasn't bad, just different. Mom started a garden with the strange plants. Dad studied the geology, which was fascinating to him. They said the other side offered a kind of peace they never found in our world. The Chens became fascinated with studying the place. Dr. Chun called it the scientific opportunity of a lifetime. The Delaneys documented everything, creating a detailed map of how the house connected to other spaces. Matthews, but you wanted to leave? Elaine, I was 14 when we crossed over. I had my whole life ahead of me. I wanted to go to college, to travel, to fall in love. I missed normal things, movies, music, friends. Danny felt the same way. We never stopped looking for a way back. So when Hayes finally created a stable passage in January of this year, we were among those who chose to return. Matthews, who else came back? Elaine, Danny, Michael Anderson, he's an adult now, of course, and the Chun twins. The rest stayed. Hayes went back after escorting us out. He said he still had work to do. The passage wasn't permanent, and he wanted to help the others who might want to leave eventually. Matthews, why have the others who returned not come forward? Elaine, we made a pact. We would all establish new identities, try to build normal lives. It's not easy coming back after so many years. The world has changed so much. Danny and Michael headed west to start over. The Chun twins went to college under new names. But I couldn't stay away from Blackwater Ridge. I needed to see the house again to make sure it was real. And I needed to warn people. Matthews. Warn them about what? Elaine. The passages are becoming more frequent, more unpredictable. Hayes said the boundaries are thinning. It's not just our house anymore. There are other places where the walls between worlds are weak. If people don't know what to look for, more will cross over. And not all of the places on the other side are as benign as where we ended up. Matthews. Miss Sullivan, you understand how incredible this story sounds. Elaine, of course I do. I've spent 40 years on the other side of a wall that shouldn't be permeable. I know what people will think when they read this, that I'm a fraud or a lunatic. But the families who lived in that house deserve to have their story told. And people need to be warned. Matthews warned about what specifically? Elaine. If you see a shimmer in a solid surface, a wall, a floor, even a ceiling, don't touch it. Don't investigate. Get out of the building immediately and don't go back. Because once you cross over, there's no guarantee you'll ever find your way home. Matthews, one last question, Miss Sullivan. The house is for sale again. Do you think someone else will buy it? Elaine, I hope not. But if they do, well, Hayes made some modifications before he left. Installed some kind of device in the basement that's supposed to stabilize the boundaries. But technology fails. Batteries die. And the walls always find a way to open. The aftermath and current status. Bill Matthews published his interview with Elaine Sullivan in the Blackwater Ridge Gazette on April 1, 2019. An unfortunate publication date that led many readers to dismiss it as an elaborate April Fool's joke. But Matthews insisted the interview was genuine and that he believed Elaine's story. The timing certainly seemed suspicious. A woman claiming to be one of the missing Sullivans just happens to reappear 40 years to the month after her family vanished. And her explanation involves parallel dimensions and permeable walls. It sounded more like the plot of one of Malcolm Hayes's novels than reality. Attempts to locate Danny Sullivan, Michael Anderson, or the Chun twins have been unsuccessful. If they did return from the other side, as Elaine claimed, they have chosen to remain anonymous. As for Elaine herself, she stayed in Blackwater Ridge for only 3 days after the interview. Where she went afterward, no one knows. The motel owner reported that she paid in cash and left no forwarding address. Her room was left immaculately clean with no personal items forgotten. Before leaving town, she made one last visit to the Oakwood house. A neighbor reported seeing her standing at the edge of the property line for nearly an hour, staring up at the windows as if expecting to see someone looking back. She never attempted to enter the grounds. The Oakwood house was purchased in June 2019 by a historical preservation society that planned to renovate it as a museum dedicated to Victorian architecture. The society's director, Dr. Margot Fleming, told the Gazette that they were fully aware of the property's notorious history and intended to include it as part of the exhibition. "We can't ignore the stories associated with this house," Dr. Fleming said. "They're part of its cultural significance. But our primary focus will be on its architectural elements and historical context." Construction crews began work in July, removing damaged drywall and repairing structural issues. However, the project was halted after 2 workers reported seeing unusual distortions in the walls of the master bedroom. One worker, Jose Ramirez, refused to return to the site after claiming he had seen his hand pass partially through a section of wall while measuring for new baseboard. "I don't care what anyone says, that place ain't right," Ramirez told a local reporter. "I've been doing construction for 20 years, and I never seen nothing like that. It was like the wall turned to jelly for a second, then went solid again. They can keep their paycheck. I ain't going back in there." The project has been indefinitely postponed. The Preservation Society cited unexpected structural complications in their press release, but rumors suggest they are having difficulty finding contractors willing to work on the property. The truth behind the mystery. Is Elaine Sullivan's story true? Did the missing families really slip through the walls of 1428, Oakwood Lane into another reality? Or is this merely an elaborate hoax perpetrated by someone with knowledge of a 40-year-old cold case? DNA testing could potentially confirm Elaine's identity, but she disappeared before investigators could request a sample. The high school ID card she left with Matthews appears authentic, according to experts, but could have been acquired by other means. The detailed knowledge of the house's interior could have been obtained through research or from someone who had access to the property over the years. Skeptics point out that her story conveniently explains why no bodies or evidence of foul play were ever found, while also allowing for the possibility that the missing people are still alive somewhere, just not in our reality. It's a narrative that offers both mystery and hope, which makes it appealing regardless of its truth. Those who believe Elaine's account suggest that Malcolm Hayes' extended stay in the house, during which he was rarely seen outside, supports her claim that he was conducting research on the permeable walls. His abrupt departure, followed by the return of individuals claiming to be the missing family members, fits the timeline she described. The house stands empty once more, its secrets locked behind doors that few dare to enter. In Blackwater Ridge, parents still warn their children to stay away from Oakwood Lane, and locals swear that on quiet nights, if you stand at the edge of the property, you can sometimes hear voices carrying on the wind, familiar voices having ordinary conversations, coming from nowhere at all. Some say if you look closely at the walls of certain old houses, particularly those built on geological fault lines or in places with unusual magnetic properties, you might catch a glimpse of something shimmering, a distortion in what should be solid, a doorway perhaps to somewhere else. But as Elaine Sullivan warned, if you ever see such a thing, don't touch it. Don't investigate. Walk away and don't look back. Because not all who wander into the spaces between worlds find their way home again. Conclusion. The Oakwood house still stands at 1428 Oakwood Lane in Blackwater Ridge, West Virginia. The for sale sign remains in the front yard, sun-bleached and weather-worn. Occasionally, a curious buyer will contact the real estate company in Charleston, but no offers have been made. Some say the house is waiting patient as only very old things can be, for the next family to cross its threshold and discover what lies beyond its walls. If you enjoyed this episode of Mystery Files, please hit that like button and subscribe for more unexplained mysteries and chilling tales. Leave your theories about the Oakwood house in the comments below. Next week, we'll explore the abandoned asylum at Thornhill Point, where patients reported seeing their doubles in the days before they died. Until then, remember to keep your eyes open and never ignore when something feels wrong about the walls around you.